Hey guys, Professor Romani again for your corporate finance class. So this video is going to be about the dividend discount model of valuing stocks, and we will be talking about different versions of the model and how to use them and so on and so. So to cap it all up, I think we talked about it a little bit in the last class. The price of any stock is the present value of all the dividends, right? So it's dividend one and dividend two, three, or all the way till infinity. Why is it till infinity? Because our corporation is assumed to last forever, and all the dividends which the firm or the stock or the corporation pays in the future, you take the present value of all those dividends according to each time period. So if dividends are paid annually, these would be like each year, dividend each year. If you're thinking about every quarter or every 6 months, it could be like quarterly dividends. And you take the present value of all of them, you could forecast all the dividends till infinity. That is, and you take the present value, and your price of your stock should be present value of all that. And that is the dividend discount model in its essence, right? So, but in practice, it's a little harder to actually forecast dividends all the way till infinity, right? So in practice, there are multiple things which you could use in order to simplify this, right? So the first scenario would be like your case one. So case one can be thought of as your zero growth model. Okay, the case one is a zero growth model. You assume that the dividends remain constant and that it does not grow over time, right? So the growth rate in dividends is zero. And this simplifies a lot of things. So this would mean D1 is the same as D2, is the same as D3, same as D infinity. This is like a steady state firm. It does not make more money or less money. Just paying out the same exact dividend. It earns a constant business and this zero growth. So in this scenario, the whole dividend, so the present value of everything, if you remember your perpetuity, the present value of a perpetuity is just C by R. Okay? So when you apply that to the stocks, the present value of the stock at time zero is just going to be D1 divided by R, where R is your discount rate or your opportunity cost of capital. Okay? So this is your zero growth model, right? And sometimes instead of dividends, you could say the company does not really grow, and the company might as well pay out all its earnings. Right? So in a zero growth model, the company is assumed to pay out all its earnings. Okay? And if a company pays out all its earnings, then this would be thought of as dividend D1 by R, can also be written as earnings per share for the first in 1 year from now or one time period from now divided by R. And that is the present value of the stock. Okay, so this in some sense is your zero growth model. The next scenario where you could try and think about it is you're simplifying this dividend growth model. Okay, this dividend growth model is being simplified, and now you'll be looking at the constant growth model. Okay, so the constant growth, like so dividends grow at the constant rate of G. So here that would mean dividend in time period 2 is going to be dividend 1, which grows by a growth rate of G. Dividend at time period 3 is going to be dividend 2 going by a growth rate of G, and so on and so. Okay. Or another way to write this is D2 is going to be D1 into 1 plus G, and D3 is going to be D1 into 1 plus G squared, or it's going to be D1 into 1 plus cubed, and so on and so. Okay, you can express the same thing again in terms of D0 as well, but let's not go there. And so now in the constant growth model, now that you have these things, because it's growing at a constant growth rate, price of the stock is going to be D1 divided by R minus G, because now it becomes a growing perpetuity problem. Okay? So this becomes the price of the stock under a constant growth model. Okay? And this growth rate, sometimes you could flip this equation to try and find out other scenarios, right? Sometimes what would you need to do? You might know the price of the stock as observed from the market, and you could try and imply what will be your return on the stock, return to the shareholder, right? If you know that the firm pays out a dividend of D1, these are the, if all these yellow highlights are the known factors, if you know these three scenarios, you can find out R, right? So in this scenario, you can flip the equation and also has the return on a stock can be thought of as the dividend divided by P0 plus the growth rate in terms of dividends. Right? So this will be the return which an investor receives. Okay, and this can be thought of as the dividend yield plus the growth rate. This exactly is the dividend yield and the growth rate is that. And so this growth rate, so what is this growth rate, right? So we say we can assume to know this growth. So this growth rate is in some sense can be thought of what is the sustainable growth rate. Dividends cannot keep growing at a constant rate forever, right? So the maximum growth rate, if you could think about it over here, is your growth rate, right? Like your denominator cannot be negative over here in this previous version. So your growth rate in some sense is always less than the opportunity cost of capital, right? So this will always hold. This relation will always hold. So let's select another color. Okay, and so this growth rate is always going to be less than the opportunity cost of capital. And what is this growth rate, right? Or more likely, what is the growth rate that a firm can sustain? Or we think about like what is this idea of sustainable growth rate? And when you try and think about what this sustainable growth rate is, then sustainable growth rate can be thought of as how much money you put back into your business and how much can it help the firm grow. Right? When you go back into your assets and liabilities, if you remember, all the earnings which you receive or which a firm receives, a firm, let's say, it earns $100 in earnings, and this can be split into two parts. One goes to additions to retained earnings, and the other version is paid out as dividends. So anything which is paid out as dividends is not really going back to the firm and goes to the shareholder. So that cannot be, the dividend payments cannot be used to grow the firm's earnings in the future. Whereas the addition and retained earnings, whatever you go put back into the firm, if that can be invested in some sort of an asset which could gain more return, right? So this addition to retained earnings will earn some sort of return. And what is the return? Well, historically, if you can assume that the firm has been whatever money you put back in, the firm can earn its returns on equity or ROE. So that will be the return which you'll be earning in some sense. Okay? So the idea of sustainable growth rate can be thought of as whatever you earn on your returns, which is your R, opportunity cost of capital, multiplied by, I'm going to write this as B, where this B is the idea of, it's known as the fallback ratio, or this B can be thought of as the retention ratio. Okay? Or in other terms, it can also be thought as the B investment ratio. Okay? So, and what are these ratios again? These ratios are just what you could call 1 minus payout ratio. Okay? So let's try and put a number to it, right? To all these numbers, like to all these ratios, let's actually try and put some numbers to it. So you earn $100 in dividends, or in earnings actually. You earn $100 in earnings, and let's say you pay out $50 in dividends. $50 is being paid in dividends. That means you have another $50 to reinvest into the firm. Right? So your dividend payout ratio over here, since you're paying half of the amount, the payout ratio is going to be 0.5. If you pay out only $30 out of the $100, your payout ratio will be 0.3. Okay, so the payout ratio is just dividends divided by earnings. And the addition to retained earnings is 1 minus the payout ratio, which is again 0.5 over here. Okay, so this plowback ratio is 0.5. And this 0.5 is what you're earning in some sense as your return on equity, right? So if your return on equity, let's assume your return on equity, if it was 10%. Okay? So if your return on equity was 10% and you're putting back 50% of your money, your growth rate in dividends would be 0.05 or 5%. So this is your sustainable growth rate. This is the maximum you can grow. This is the maximum rate at which a firm can grow its dividends. Okay? So this is an idea of how to compute G, or if you do not know G, if you can find out G, how to compute your R, how to compute your B. So given some of the parameters, you can always find out the other parameters. So this is the idea of sustainable growth rate, which is found out by the return on equity R. This R is also ROE. Okay, and B is your plowback ratio or retention ratio, which is actually 1 minus payout ratio. This payout ratio can be also termed as dividend payout ratio if you want to be a little more specific. And your final scenario is the case 3. Okay, so again, remember these are all special cases of your overall dividend discount model, which goes all the way till infinity. So here, we do not know, we just have non-constant growth rates. And so your P0 is going to be like D1 by R, D2 divided by 1 plus R squared, D3 divided by 1 plus R cubed, D4 divided by 1 plus R 4, and so on. So the idea is, instead of going all the way till infinity, right, you could kind of, you can't really forecast all the dividends to infinity, but you could try and get a guess for a few periods ahead in time. You forecast your growth till some time period n plus dn divided by, and you try and make a forecast of what the stock price could be at that point in time, right? Like at n time periods in the future, where n could be like for different, n could be as short as 3, it could be 5, it could be 7, whatever, or it could be 10. It could be any number up to which you could make a somewhat reasonable dividend forecast of you. So typically between 3 and 5 years. Okay, so after that, you try and find out, take a leap of faith and try and have some assumptions, and you find out the price of the stock, or you put in the price of the stock, and you take the present value of all that. Right, now what is the idea behind the price of the stock? So from here, you could forecast with some sort of accuracy. Any analyst could make some sort of reasonable assumption as to what the dividends would be in each of the next few years. Right? Sometimes these dividends could just be like $1, and then there might be 1.25 and 1. Right? And after that, sometimes it might suddenly increase to 2, and then like stay at 2 for a little bit, and then like increase to 3. Dividends tend to be sticky, and the firms do not have a constant target payout ratio. But beyond a particular time, after a few years, it's reasonable to assume some sort of constant growth rate, and this growth rate is potentially given by this formula over here, the sustainable growth rate. And after a few years, you assume that the firm starts growing at a sustainable growth rate, And once the firm is growing at a sustainable growth rate, that means after a few time periods or n time periods from now, further on, you assume that the dividend grows at a rate of G. And that would mean the Pn is going to be dividend at time n plus 1 divided by R minus G. Okay, so this is how you find out price of the stock n time periods into the future. And once you find that out, you plug that back in, and then you could find out the present value of the stock using this way. So this is your non-constant growth version of your dividend discount model. Okay, so these are your three versions, and I would suggest you work out multiple problems from each of these scenarios and practice yourself in terms of how to solve and how to find out the value of a stock. And that's it for this video. See you all